Hey, welcome everyone this afternoon to the Turnkey Talks. I just have a quick request. This is Otis Fulton. I'm a consultant for Turnkey. If somebody could just text me or in the chat and just let me know that you're hearing us, that would be great. Today's Turnkey Talks, we're going to focus on how to build a new walk program from the ground up. The two people that you will be hearing today are myself and Carolyn Edrington, the National Director of Miles for Melanoma from the Melanoma Research Foundation. And as I said, I'm Otis Fulton. I'm our behavioral consultant here at Turnkey. Turnkey, as you may know, develops and implements strategies that help nonprofits maximize fundraising via peer-to-peer programs. And we work with 15 of the top 30 largest U.S. nonprofits and some great smaller ones like the Melanoma Research Foundation. And we're very excited about Carolyn telling us how she built this program from the ground up. And she's going to talk us through kind of how she went from virtually nothing to where she was last year at 1.6 million. And so I'm going to ask her to take us through this, the statistics of the event and comparing several metrics year from year. So Carolyn, again, welcome, and so excited to have you here with us today. And so I'm going to start you off by talking about your revenue to start.
Okay. Thank you, Otis. As you said, I'm Carolyn Edrington with the Melanoma Research Foundation, and I've been working here since 2010, so that'll explain the data on the slides. And what we've been tracking over the past several years since I've been here, obviously, is our revenue and other growth. So you can see those over the next few slides. And what we're going to talk about is how I somehow managed to make those numbers go up almost every year. So on this first one, it's not exactly smooth going up, but I can go through those and we'll talk about them throughout the rest of the session. But I'm sure many of you have got your eyes caught on that 2014 to 2015 jump, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that. So on the next one for participants, you'll see in teams how, yeah, participants, there you go. That's okay. That one's a much more progressive, natural growth upward, not a lot of downward turn anywhere. Again, a big jump from 2014 to 2015. And we'll be talking about that. And we're going to bump through these slides. The teams is next, showing similar growth. And number 6, showing participant fundraising growth. So again, 2014 to 2015, an excellent year. And so I wanted you to see these and have an idea of where we've been over the past 6 or 7 years. And now we'll start from the background, and I'll give you the history of how this all happened. So next slide is something that we've all had a big laugh over. If you just take a quick glance at this, you might think it says MILF for melanoma, and I'm going to make this a family talk and not explain what that is. If you don't know, ask a friend, but don't Google it at work. So one of the very first things when I came in to work here was we had a very grassroots, homegrown Miles for Melanoma program that was started by a wonderful man who was a patient who ran the New York City Marathon and raised money for us. And he drew this little logo, and like most of you know or have in your own groups or have friends doing some kind of event where they raise money, that's just what this guy did. And he raised a bunch of money through the New York City Marathon through his family, and it kind of took off. The organization itself had no real staffing at the time when he did this, and it was just completely volunteer driven. So a couple other people picked up on the name and started a small 5K walk. So more than 6 years ago, we had 3 5K walks called Miles for Melanoma. None of them used the same webpage. None of them used the same logo. None of them did anything together, but they were raising us a few dollars. And you can see then, so what would happen when I came on in 2010 was I saw this logo. I knew that we had these handful of events that were somewhat mixed up and decided to rebrand. So we took our our logo, the Melanoma Research Foundation logo, has this same wings look to it with our text underneath it, and I added the activity portion and made it Miles for Melanoma. So upon doing that, I also needed to bring the folks in who were raising money for us, who were not exactly, it was just volunteer events. It was like DIY. It was basically everybody for themselves, but send a check to the MRF. So I took a lot of time and effort to chat with the groups that were doing these walks, make sure that they still felt like they were a part of what we were doing, and that they knew exactly how important they were for what we were doing, because truly these guys became the foundation of our entire program. I asked them to change their web pages and use our fundraising site. I asked them to change their color and feel and logos. I got a lot of pushback, but it was really worth it, because in the end they all came on board and realized that we were able to give them so much more that they could use in terms of collateral and messaging and data as they carried their walks forward, and it really paid off. But make no bones about it, if you're in a situation where you're trying to get some volunteers who are doing their own thing to come into a program that you want to brand, it's challenging and takes a lot of customer service. But again, totally worth it. So the positive for me is that it brought an understanding for me that there were people out there that had a common purpose. It helped me in messaging, and it created just an offer. It gave me something to offer people who would want to join what we were doing, who would volunteer and say, I live in Kansas City and there's not a walk here, can I start one? And now I had the tools and the brand and the information to give that to them. So it was a big help. It was a big challenge. It was a career boost for me in terms of learning how to do stuff, but it absolutely 180 degrees changed the way we did our Miles for Melanoma walks.
That's a great step forward. Thank you for sharing all that. So clearly you corralled some things that needed corralling, and I know the course that you took next was kind of counterintuitive. You stopped doing some things, and before we kind of disclose what it was that you stopped doing, I'm going to take a few minutes and just kind of go into the psychological background for why the things that you did worked. And some of you on the broadcast here may have seen this before. I'm going to go through this briefly, but it's kind of important for those who haven't to set the stage about the psychological principles that were involved in crafting the strategy that was used here. So I'm going to start talking about recognition. Turnkey's a recognition company, and recognition was part and parcel of the program that Carolyn is using. And why is recognition so important? Why is it? We know it's very motivating. Recognition tells people, I see you. This picture here is a picture of the African savanna. And this is where 98% of our ancestors lived, and this is where our brains evolved to survive. And in the African savanna, the biggest factor whether or not you survived was sociability, how social you were. And in fact, humans over the generations became hardwired for sociability. And we know now that recognition is a major social cue. Being recognized tells us that when there are resources to be shared, we're going to be included. And that finely tuned antenna for recognition over the centuries really helped people to survive. And now we know that recognition is as basic as food. This theory that recognition was important and so forth was a theory and psychologists had for many, many years, but now we know that humans are hardwired this way, and we know that because of the last 20 years, the accessibility of MRI scanners. And again, we know now recognition is highly pleasurable, it's highly rewarding. Give you an example. There was a researcher at UCLA, and he put folks into an MRI machine, and he just had them read some simple recognition statements, things like, I can always count on you. And what happens when they read these recognition statements is their brains lit up. The reward pathway that lit up was the same one that lights up when you eat your favorite food. So, we all know that kind of food is a fundamental need of people, and so we know that recognition is too. In fact, this researcher, Dr. Matthew Lieberman of UCLA, has a great quote. He said, "Our brains crave the positive evaluation of others to an almost embarrassing degree." And you know, this need, this antenna for recognition is so finely attuned in us. You would think that, gosh, this would work for friends and family and so forth, but the recognition pathway, the reward pathway lights up even when we're recognized by complete strangers. So humans are just very, very wired to respond positively to recognition. So let's kind of turn to the relationships your organizations have with volunteers, like the ones that Carolyn has. You know, psychologists call these social relationships. When you ask people who are in social relationships why they do the things that they support Carolyn's organization and so forth, they typically just say, you know, because we feel like it's the right thing to do. It's consistent with their attitudes. And that's where we want to keep volunteers. And by volunteers, I just mean anybody that doesn't work for the organization. They may be a donor, they may be a volunteer for their time and so forth. We want to keep them in these social relationships because they do a lot for us when they're motivated that way, but it's easy to throw a social relationship out of whack if you don't manage it right. And I want to tell you, to kind of give you an idea about that, an example of a daycare study that was done about 10 years ago in Israel that got a lot of attention, and it kind of set the stage. Israel has public daycares. They had a big problem with people picking their kids up late. They had about 25% of their parents picking up their children late. And so they worked with the university there, and they came up with a plan to charge a small fine when the kids were picked up late. I think it was about $4 or $5 US, and it was per child. So if you had a couple of kids there, if you picked your kids up late, it could be 10, however many per kids. And so they instituted the fine, and within about 16 weeks, very counterintuitively, the late pickups had increased to 40%. At which point they said, gosh, you know, certainly we've got some unintended consequences here. We're not exactly sure what's happening. Why don't we just take the fine away? You know, clearly it's making things worse, not better. So after 16 weeks, they did away with the fine, at which point immediately late pickups went up to almost double what they were originally. They went up to 48%. Well, you know, this study got, as I said, got a lot of attention. Very interesting implications. How can we explain this? Well, it turns out people live in two different worlds. They live in a world governed by social exchanges, and they live in a world at the same time governed by market exchanges. And these two worlds have different norms. And introducing market norms into social exchanges violates the social norms. And what happened here is the parents who were in social relationships, they were picking up their kids because it's the right thing to do, reframed this social relationship into a market relationship. And how do we know that? Well, we know that because when the fine was lifted, late pickups increased. Now it became an even better deal to stay a half an hour late in the office and pick your kid up at 6 o'clock. You know, the title of this study when it was released was "A Fine is a Price." And so what these parents were doing was they had just reframed this into a $3 price for their extra half an hour or hour at the office. And my point is, once you go from a social relationship to a market relationship, it's very difficult to get people back into a social relationship. You know, what happens is the market norms trump the social norms. And as a friend of mine who's a behavioral economist down at Duke University, Dan Ariely, he's said in his book, Predictably Irrational, it was a bestseller back in 2008, once you've offered to pay for her delightful Thanksgiving dinner, your mother-in-law will remember the incident for years to come. And so we want to keep our volunteers in these social relationships, because what happens is when they go into market relationships, they expect to be paid. And that has some interesting types of unintended consequences that we'll talk about with Carolyn and her program as well. So how does this market and social relationship idea relate to motivating volunteers? Psychologists talk about two different types of motivation, intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So let's take extrinsic first. Extrinsic motivation works fine in many situations. In people who are extrinsically motivated are doing whatever they do in order to get something. So it could be something external. You know, you might have volunteers come and park cars at an event in order to get tickets to a local baseball game. You know, it's very in nonprofit we talk about transactional relationships a lot. So it could be some kind of a thing. It could also be an experience. You know, they could be extrinsically motivated to run an event. So some event that has some kind of a cost associated with it, like a registration fee. We'll talk more about that later. That can also extrinsically motivate people. The other type of motivation is intrinsic motivation. People who are intrinsically motivated are typically people, as I was saying, who are in social relationships. People who are intrinsically motivated do things because, again, they say it's the right things to do. It's consistent with their attitudes. It really becomes part of who they are. And so that kind of gives us a clue as to how we can develop intrinsic motivation. And we do that by developing what psychologists call intrinsic labels or self-labels. It's very similar to the idea of self-image. People who are intrinsically motivated, they behave in ways that are consistent with these self-labels. So what we want to do is shape these intrinsic labels. And I'm going to give you an example from the research. Very interesting piece of research, and there's a lot of research in this area. I'm just going to give you one. It turns out that if you can get someone to describe themselves as a chocolate lover as opposed to someone who loves to eat chocolate lover, someone who loves to eat chocolate. So chocolate lover is a noun. Someone who loves to eat chocolate is a verb. That's a very small difference. But it turns out the person who describes themselves as a chocolate lover has a much higher preference for chocolate than someone who just says, I love to eat chocolate, because it's part of this intrinsic labels. So, you know, what we want to do is create opportunities for people to become melanoma evangelists. I'm a big follower of politics, and it's interesting, during the primaries, what the parties were doing was just calling people and trying to get them to activate their voter label. I'm a voter. And then they knew that if they would get these people to go out and vote by calling them, helping them self-label themselves as voters, they would be much more likely to go out and vote for their candidate. So, you know, people who consider themselves to be nouns rather than verbs have these strong intrinsic labels, and that gives them strong intrinsic motivation. And the important thing is that sustains over time. They're going to go out and find ways to further your mission because it's really part of who they are. And so, you know, how does recognition strengthen self-labels? As I said, you know, Turnkey is a strategy company. There are several ways here. You know, the first, my little icon, is with personal contact. You know, recognizing someone by saying, thank you, you know, thank you, I saw you do what you did. And, you know, as we said earlier, it doesn't even matter if it's from a stranger. So this personal contact is a very powerful way, but it's tough to manage. You've got thousands of volunteers and so forth, this kind of a social recognition program. So a lot of people use these small gifts. And, you know, gifts that are branded with your logo and so forth kind of accomplishes two things at once. I call them public displays of affiliation. You've heard the term PDA. It reinforces a person's self-label. You know, one of the most important eyeballs that sees a T-shirt, our industry is crazy about T-shirts, are the person who is wearing the T-shirt, because it reinforces that self-label. It's also a form of what psychologists call social signaling when they're wearing these branded items. You know, it says, I'm engaged in these pro-social behaviors, I'm supporting an organization like Carolyn's, I do things that benefit the group. You know, and people are more pro-social in public, so people like to advertise their involvement in these pro-social groups. And then kind of my third icon here, the microphone. Another very powerful way to strengthen self-label is by having people relate their experiences. Psychologists talk about something called image motivation. People have a desire to be liked and well regarded by others. And so by talking about, here in the South, it's hard not to use a church metaphor, but witnessing what you're doing to other folks really is a way to strengthen that self-label, because if you're talking about your pro-social behavior to others, it really ingrains that pro-social idea, and it makes it really part of your own label. So, a lot of times people use these small recognition items, and psychologists have a phrase, it's called the less leads to more effect. And you can actually get people to do more by giving them less. It seems kind of counterintuitive until you kind of think about the social relationship, market relationship idea. People will do more if they think that they're in a social relationship rather than a market relationship. If it's the right thing to do, they're going to be very intrinsically motivated, and they're going to act on your behalf independently. So, when we do give these small recognition items to folks, psychologists have another term, it's called insufficient justification. Nobody comes out and volunteers 20 hours in a weekend in order to get a t-shirt. That would be crazy. The t-shirt's insufficient justification for a person working all weekend. But when you start to hand out iPads, you start to hand out gift certificates to Starbucks, anything with value that can be calculated in dollars and cents, there's this unconscious calculation that goes through somebody's mind. They said, gosh, I just worked 20 hours for a $20 gift card to Target. Was that time really worth it? And it suggests that you're in a market relationship. So, what we talk about a lot of times is, in fact, Turnkey started out as a, quote, incentive program. We don't want to incentivize people with the things we give them. We want to recognize people with the things we give them. And so, again, anything we give them should be of insufficient justification for anybody to say, I just worked all year for the Melanoma Foundation Association in order to get this iPad. That's a market relationship, and we want to keep people out of that. As I said, we talk about this as the less leads to more effect. So my kind of suggestions is that items always be branded when we give somebody a recognition item, because that helps for them to identify with that in terms of their self-label. It should be a very modest value, which is the good news, because we have to spend less on these kinds of things. And then the other thing that's kind of important is, it's great if they're not commercially available. It should be something special that the person gets via their association or their whatever they've done for the organization. So, just to kind of sum up, where we want to keep people, we want to keep them out of these market relationships. They're transactional. The title of the Daycare Study that I mentioned was "A Fine is a Price." Well, things like registration fees, they're also a price. They suggest to people that they're in a market relationship, and once they pay the registration fee, then they think, I'm done. I've paid. So they don't tend to do a whole lot more. We want to keep them in social relationships where there isn't any kind of a market transaction. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and intrinsically motivated people will find ways to go out and independently find ways to help you above and beyond just what you ask for. So would you like to tell us some ways that you have implemented these kinds of ideas, Carolyn?
Yeah, so it's going to sound a little counterintuitive, but back in 2011, after I had started, I definitely went for an incentives program, and I looked at it in those terms. I was thinking, I've got to get these guys to be motivated to raise more money, and and I need to, I also need to thank them. They need to have something in return for their effort. So I got involved with Turnkey, and when we first started, it truly was considered incentive. It was looked at, I looked at the items as, well, would they raise money for an iPad? I should probably get the iPad. Would they really raise money for a ball cap or a water bottle? It's kind of like, nah, I just can't see it, right? Now, let's keep in mind that probably most of you on the phone, and myself as well, have been in this industry for at least long enough to get jaded by how many T-shirts you can possibly stuff in one drawer. So it did feel a little like, I really don't think that they need this item, and I was thinking solely in terms of a market relationship. Does this guy really need another T-shirt? Is he really going to go to his boss and say, please give me another $50 so I can have this T-shirt? But at the time, not knowing sort of, you can tell that in the back of my head I was still having this question. I just didn't know the answers, and I didn't have the language. But it turns out that, in fact, people will do that. And it really isn't because it's a market relationship. It really is because they were being properly thanked. They were finding a way to engage in our group and have this affiliation, even if it was a ball cap or a T-shirt. So in the early days, it was simply, here's your thank you item for fundraising, but it changed quickly. And the language, if you want to switch to the next slide, was mission related. It spoke to the people about what the money was doing once it was raised, and it just brought the people into the fold of the cause. So instead of just saying, hey, if you raise this, you're going to get this, and at the end, hey, thanks for raising this, here's your hat, it was messaging that was really talking about the relationship between what they were doing, how they were fundraising for us, and what we were doing with the money and what we were doing in our work. And over the years, you can see, and from those previous slides, that it helped with growth. Now, there are other factors I'm going to share with you that led to the growth. I will not ever say to you, get them a ball cap and you're going to raise a bunch of money. That's not exactly how it works. But knowing how to speak with the folks that are already a part of your team is really, really important. And that word team or together or we, all of that matters, and in how you're telling them that they are in your community. So,
and let me just mention too, Carolyn, that this recognition messaging, like we're showing here, is really truly a form of recognition. It's rewarding, just like getting a bracelet and so forth is. So this, these messages are very important in terms of recognizing people and getting them to continue to do the kind of things that we do to support Melanoma Research Foundation.
Yeah, I'll tell just a short story on, I've told Katrina and Otis, and that is the way I got into this industry over a dozen or more years ago was that I decided I wanted to run a marathon, and I chose to go with Team in Training. I went to their little orientation, and they showed me a moving video, and I cried, and I signed up and all that. But I really, really, really just wanted to run the marathon. I didn't have a tie to leukemia. My best friend's sister did have it and had passed away from it, but it didn't have like a major impact in my life where I was going to go change the face of leukemia. I just wanted to run a marathon. So I went out and raised the money that they told me to raise. I mean, strictly market relationship. They said I had to raise $5,000 so I could go to Anchorage, Alaska and run a marathon without having to pay for the trip, and that's exactly what I did. But I did more. I was pretty good at it. Turns out through my networking that I found more people I knew who were tied to leukemia, and you guys are probably very familiar with this kind of story. You know, the more you put the emails out, the more you learn of people that are tied to that cause. So I'd raised a bunch of money. So they gave me an extra prize for fundraising, and it was a sweatshirt. And there's nobody on Team in Training here, so hopefully I'm not offending anybody. It was the ugliest sweatshirt I've ever received in my whole life. It was a color of green I would never wear with some orange and yellow logo because it had the sunrise from Anchorage. And it was the most amazing marathon and the most amazing trip, and by far the ugliest sweatshirt, and I've never worn it, but I still have it. I remember it because I got called out for doing something really cool and big and important to me, and as I said, I had come along to know so many more people that were tied to leukemia, so it became something that really did mean something to me. So I am a firm believer that these items do make a difference in what people believe when they're thanked, and they're thanked with an item that has that connection. So I always have to put that out there because damn ugliest sweatshirt ever.
and you know, I think everybody has the experience of seeing somebody at the grocery store with some kind of a cause T-shirt that's clearly been through the washer and dryer, you know, 300 times and it's got holes in it and so forth, but they're wearing it anyway. So
Yep.
yeah, that's a very good example.
For sure. Okay, so I love this little kid. So we're going to talk about some growth and some of the things that I needed to do, wanted to do, was required to do, and what happened with me and my team here at the MRF over the past 6 or 7 years. So I came in 2010. I just sort of had to herd cats for a little bit. 2011, I got my feet underneath me and knew what I wanted to do and was starting to create some growth plan. And in 2012, got a requirement from the board that really scared the pants off me. I've told people I just kind of went into the fetal position and started sucking my thumb. I did not know what I was going to do, but I knew I needed help. And I just said, I'll try to make this growth happen for you, but I really am going to need some staff. The way I was able to do that is background. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. Our offices are in Washington, D.C., and we started an event here in Nashville. I started an event here in Nashville with some friends and a woman who was a patient here. And I asked if I could hire one of our volunteers. We had a really wonderful volunteer who had just moved here, and I asked for some money to pay her a stipend to work the event. And that opened the door. Turns out she's just a godsend and an incredible employee now, but she showed how having a little bit more staff dedicated to the event was changed the face of the event. So when I had done it by myself the first year, it was good, but the second year she came on board and it was great. So I had a way to show to the board that adding staff would help increase my walk successes. And because they had given me this crazy goal, I begged and I got a new person, and she was half-time for a little while, and now she's with us full-time. So that was one way that I answered the unrealistic growth requirement that they had put before me. I'm going to go, Otis, to the next slide and jump into 2013 so we can keep going and give them time to ask questions. Good. The other thing we had started in 2012, maybe I've got those years. I think I got those years right. But we started working with Ironman. We jumped into the endurance field. And actually, I apologize for this. I'm going to back up a little bit. Earlier in the slides, we mentioned that I stopped doing a few things. We had some golf tournaments. They were kind of DIY. One of them was not DIY. It took a ton of my time. We had an attempt at a team and training program where we had a volunteer that was training people to do an endurance marathon program and raise money in the very typical way where they had to commit with a credit card and all that stuff. And I was managing that alone. And so another part of this, if you want me to grow, battle I was having with the board, I asked them to release these events. And I said, I want to stop the training program and I want to stop the golf program. Definitely got some pushback for that. People thought I was nuts. It was obviously income, but it was high maintenance income. It was expensive income. So I said, I'll focus on these walks and I'll give you better income, but we're going to eliminate golf and we're going to eliminate the training. However, we had this Ironman relationship and I did not want to give that up. So we gave it a shot, and I'll be honest, mission related, it was phenomenal. It was the best thing we could have been doing. These were people of high wealth, so we knew we could turn them into donors. These were people who were outdoors all the time because they were training so much. So they were very, very high-risk melanoma. And interestingly, they were people with insurance who would regularly see physicians but never saw derms, and we did surveys on these folks. And they never took the time to go to a dermatologist. And during our couple of years with Ironman, we would do screenings, and we found an unbelievably high rate of melanoma diagnoses out of these folks. However, as some of you probably know, endurance programs like the type where you partner with an Ironman or a rock and roll marathon, it's extraordinarily expensive. It's highly staff intensive. So I eliminated yet another program. And by I mean the board. I kind of fought that one. I didn't think we should do it, but financially we needed to. So after a couple of years with Ironman, we eliminated that as well. But here's the reason why. We were able to create stronger, better relationships with the walk folks than we were with anybody else. And so this ties into you, Otis, about your extrinsic motivation and market relationships.
Right. You know, and as you know, we talk about these in terms of these events being either retail attractive or retail unattractive. You know, people who sign up to play golf, you know, they donate to play golf. They do it because they like to play golf. People, the small slice of people that do endurance events, you know, they pay your reg fee because they want to run in your event. You know, contrast that against people who are the walkers. You know, nobody has to pay in order to walk. So that's why we call them retail unattractive events. And those are the people that you really find are going to be intrinsically motivated. They're not paying a registration fee to walk. You can walk anywhere. They're doing it because they're there to raise money for your organization. So, you know, it's tough to do what you did because they are revenue streams, things like the endurance, things like the golf tournament. But when you throw your resources then, and we've seen this time and time again, into these retail unattractive, you get a much better return on investment over time. And that's what you found, is it not, Carolyn?
It is. I mean, trying to create a relationship with enough endurance athletes to do Ironman to cover all the expenses it's enormous. And typically those are people with already enough demands on their time. So as much as I didn't want to leave that relationship because of the mission, I couldn't afford it. So I would just beg you to look at, even though it has potential for high income, to really understand what your relationship with those folks can be and where you can spend your time. And most of us in this field know that 20-80 rule, that you need to spend most of your time on those 20% fundraisers, and I really had to do that and bite the bullet to make that happen. And you guys have seen the chart, and we'll show you more charts again. It makes a difference.
And here's the good news.
Here's the good news on the way up. Okay, so I pulled it off. We raised some more money the following year, and they said, all right, keep going. We want you to do more. I was at a peer-to-peer a handful of years ago, and somebody was on the stage talking about how they convinced their board to give them a couple staff, and their numbers went up. So I copied the slide from that conference and took it to my board and said, see these numbers? If you guys give me more staff, I'm going to increase your fundraising. And I was nervous as heck, but I did it anyway, and we did. So in 2015, by 2015, I had 2 logistics coordinators. I took my girl from Nashville, because she's amazing. Her name's Jenna, and she's fab. And I cloned her with a young lady named Sarah, who's also fab, because I think they might be listening, so I have to be really nice here. And they didn't just, if you build it, they will come, because we can do that, right? Any of us can put on a walk. You can call a park and get a permit, and you can put some porta potties out there and a couple of tents and have a walk. It's not hard to do. And you can raise a little money doing that. But there's so much more to it, and these guys get it. So they create the walks, but they assist with all of the other parts of it, getting sponsorships and decision-making about how we're going to engage people, and we share all of our messaging with each other as a team prior to it going out, so that we're all on the same page about how we communicate. So now I've got 2 logistics coordinators, and then I also was able to hire what I call a communications or engagement coordinator, and her job, bless her heart, is to be emailing all day long. So she's in Team Raiser sending out emails. The generic emails that come back all go to her, so she's answering questions about fundraising and how do I turn on my page and why doesn't this picture look right, and my mom died and what am I going to do, and I mean, she gets it all, but she is dedicated to communicating to those people, and they get answers and they get responses. So we have built a relationship. They know that we're there. They know that they can talk to us and that we'll help them in any part of the game. So with building more events, doing the events well, and then having somebody dedicated to communicating, I increased fundraising. I should not say we increased fundraising by 66%. And it just hands down shows you that catering to the people who want to be a part of what you do and can easily be a part of what you do, and recognizing them for what they do will absolutely modify your revenue. So 2014, you can see the 2015 huge jump. Now I've got a 2016 bar in there. I have submitted a very cautious budget for 2016 because we're going to go into these next things, and then I think this is what's going to get you to be asking a lot of questions. I decided to drop the registration fee. Got a bunch of pushback from various people in various areas that I work, some from my own team, some from people outside the organization, some from the board. Like, are you kidding me? You know, this is how many dollars we get when we do a registration fee. But I've read enough white papers from people in the industry. I had run a test on the Nashville event over a couple of years, having it and not having it, and pulled the plug and just said, we're not going to do registration fees anymore. At the end of 2015, we did a survey and asked, we knew how many fundraised and how many didn't, but we asked them in the survey whether or not they did. Interestingly, there were some people that didn't fundraise that said they did, and we asked them why they did or didn't, and they said that the registration fee was their gift. You and I know it's not. It covers our costs. So they really weren't motivated to do more. These are the same people who would also say, please don't waste your money on that ball cap gift for me, yet they'll take the ball cap after they've fundraised. So all of that data just shows us that when we recognize them, it matters. It makes a difference. When we allow them the opportunity to choose to fundraise versus paying a fee, they'll fundraise. So the no registration fee has been a big deal. We're only a few events in this far, so I don't have any data to share with you, but I feel strongly that it's going well. And these are changes that really go against the grain. Now, the second bullet on here, we could have come back to that earlier, but I also used to give away free cotton T-shirts that said melanoma on them, things like that. I'm sure you guys all do it. And we stopped doing that. We made it the first level of the recognition program. You get your shirt after $100. But the shirt says, I'm a melanoma champion, and it labels you as somebody who's done something for the cause. It's also a nicer shirt. It's a wicking tech shirt, so it's really nice. But it doesn't just say, I attended this event for free or for 30 bucks. It says, I went out and made a difference in the lives of people with melanoma, and now I have this cool shirt, and I'm going to wear it. And it has also made a huge difference. I got probably 3 really horrible complaints from people in my event world and our participants who were just furious with me. But I have thousands of people that come to these events. So 3 complaints didn't bother me. I mean, I handled it, but I didn't get the pushback from the participants that I thought I would. That event shirt, I think, has made the biggest difference also in that income. And we knew that the number of fundraisers who were below 100 one year and over 100 the second year also increased significantly, which applies to that 66% increase.
Yeah, hey, Carolyn, if I can just jump in and comment, as I mentioned a couple of times now, the title of that daycare study was "A Fine is a Price."
Yeah.
The registration fee was a price, wasn't it? People paid their money, and they had done, and they felt like they didn't have to do anything else. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, I think that's exactly. They told us that specifically when we said, why didn't you fundraise? And they wrote back and said, because I already paid my money.
We paid.
They told us that when I said, well, you're not getting a free T-shirt anymore, but if you raise $100, you'll get it, and they did. And they told us that when the number of fundraisers went up when we started dropping the registration fee for the one walk we tested. So I wholeheartedly believe that the price is, that exactly that fine is the price. In our case, the registration fee is the price. And you can't get into the dirty laundry of, hey, your $35 actually paid for that porta potty and that police card that's sitting there blocking the street for you. They don't want to know that, right? They need to know that their $35 went to the cause. So if they think it's a fundraising, if they go and still only give us $35, but it was a donation, it's entirely different in their mind. It's not a fee anymore. And now they've fundraised, and now they've actually done something good for our organization, and they feel good about it, and we're happy too. So it works. But remember, this is over 6 years, and this was a handful of changes, a lot of begging for staff, but it makes a difference. And if you can share this data with the powers that be in your organization who want to say no more staff or whatever, you can see it will have an impact. And it may take a couple of years, but it works, and it'll get there.
And tell us what's next. Oops.
So I love these numbers, and I love that we've put a rainbow here. I have to do a budget just like the rest of you, and I have to pretend I know exactly what's going to happen in the next 12 months. So I promised that we would have an increase in team participation by 50% and an increase in fundraisers by 25%. I didn't completely pull those numbers out of the air, but they are just based on that I know we're still growing, that we are doing a much better job at focusing our messaging to the teams and the team captains, and that we are talking more about fundraising and how you're fundraising versus just paying to show up. So take those numbers with a grain of salt. Maybe we'll have this call again next year and I can tell you if it worked, but this future here is just what I told the board I would think I can do.
Well, you know, based on that picture, your future looks great. I'll tell you what.
It looks bad, yeah. Rainbows and flowers. Let's just hope that's the case. But I think it is, and you know, we're a cancer that's still growing, so our numbers are going up also because of that. But I think I've got a team put together I'm extremely proud of, that do a good job, that understand this this idea of relationships, that the people we are inviting to join us on these weekend walks are not just people who are coming in with money. There's so much more to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we've gotten to the end here. Thank you so much. And, you know, I wanted to put up our emails. We do have time for a few questions. If anybody would like to type in a question for myself or for Carolyn, we'll be happy to answer it. Okay. How many walks do you have every year, Carolyn?
We're over 30. I started with those 3 at the beginning, and we're up to 31-ish this year.
Are they volunteer-led or locally based staff?
They are almost solely done by staff. We have a couple where we have very strong volunteers doing the majority of the work, but we drive nearly everything.
Got it. How do you resource the DIY walks? Do you have a strategy for higher potential walks with larger partners, perhaps?
So we will sometimes get a call that'll say, hey, I really want to start a walk in my hood, and what can I do? We will suss them out through some conversations, make sure that they really understand how much work is involved. We have to look at our calendar and their calendar, that kind of stuff. But if a volunteer wants to do one, and we feel like it'll work, we have what we call our walk in a box. Very boring name for a bunch of documents that help them see a timeline, what they need to do, how to get in touch with your local governing body of the park you may or may not want to use, that kind of stuff. So we created basically a how we do our job document for them to use, but we have not really set anybody off completely on their own to do a walk with our branded name. That doesn't mean we don't have some DIY walks, and they do everything on their own, pay for everything on their own, and send us a check at the end. But anything that has the Miles to Melanoma brand, we will take control of, and then the amount of work then will just depend on how strong those volunteers are.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. This is a good one from Bonnie Hanna. How did you cover your event expenses that you lost in not charging reg fees? I know that that's something that a lot of people struggle with.
Okay, so that's new this year. We don't know that we will have a loss, and we are not just hoping, but pretty certain that we won't lose that money. We think that the fundraising is going to pick it up. I think the person that paid $35 that's now coming for free is going to fundraise.
Okay. From Michelle Phillips Trademan, this is a good one. How did you convince your board to drop the reg fee and go with the minimum?
Ooh, I didn't ask them. My board doesn't have that level of approval. It's the T-shirts and the no fee are decisions that I was able to make on my own, and I obviously told them about it, but did not have to ask permission.
How long did it take you to get to 30 events, I assume?
So yeah, 7 years. We were at, like I said, we were at 3 when I started in 2010, and we're at 31 now. And it's a little vague because some are new and some went away. So we've had growth the entire time, but there was one where you saw where teams went down. One very big event went away, and it was because we needed those volunteers, and the volunteers were just done, and we lost that event.
What is your territory? Do you cover those 31 walks, and do you do these year-round?
National, coast to coast, and yes, we're everywhere from, we got a couple in 3 or 4 in the West Coast, like 2 or 3 in California and others. We're all over the country. We've got Florida, we've got Northeast, we've got everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I have no events in January. That's it.
How do you resource the field staff to make sure they're all aligned? And would you be willing to send the walk-in-a-box document?
We'd be happy to share the document. If the question is coordinating my staff, I have 2 in D.C. I didn't mention there's another half-time person who does our DIY for us. So I have 2 staff in D.C., 1 in Boston and 1 in Nashville here with me. And I work with them very closely, and we meet in person twice a year, if not more. As for the volunteer coordinators, we really screen them very carefully to make sure that they really understand how much dedication it's going to take. And the event coordinators, Jenna and Sarah, whom I bragged about, just spend a lot of time on the phone with them and emailing them and answering questions and hand-holding.
Good, great. How do you choose the locations of your new walks?
Hit or miss. Sometimes somebody will call us and say, I really want to do a walk in this city. We might already have one nearby, so we try to look at our constituent database to see what our support might be already in that area. Sometimes we'll pick a new city on our own. We've had a very strong constituency in Philadelphia for a really long time, and we only just started an event there last year. Depends. And seasonal, right? Like if you don't call me from Michigan and do one in January, it's not going to happen.
Right. Do you ask the walkers to raise a minimum to return the next year?
Nope, we don't. Now, we are in the phase of considering how we're going to do early registration for the following year or anything like that. But no, we don't ask them to raise any minimums. They just have their recognition items at certain levels.
Mm-hmm. All right, we've got one more. She's asking, do you ask the individual walk, not the walker, the event itself, to raise the minimum, to raise something?
Oh, if it's a DIY? So I hope I'm answering this correctly. If it's a DIY, if we ask them to create a walk, would they have to raise enough to come back next year? No. And here's the reason. We don't pay any of those expenses. So we don't have anything on our books that shows a loss or a poor margin. So if it's a DIY event, they fund it and create it, and if they decide to give us $5, we'll thank them for $5. If they give us $5,000, then that's great too.
Okay.
I hope that answers. And just in case some of you, there's another criteria that may matter to you guys. It's not really tied to this particular topic, but we have a mission that's grants and research and advocacy. We do not provide income to patients or patient travel or clinical trial expenses or anything like that. So when a DIY fundraiser wants to give money to that, they have to be a DIY fundraiser because we can't pay those things out. So then we say, if you want to do a walk, that's great, and if you want to give some money to your local Ronald McDonald House or to a particular patient, then you have to do it DIY, and then you can give us whatever you have left over. And that's the tax, IRS, that's all mission-related, audit, charity navigator kind of stuff.
Yeah, we got someone that wants to know, do you offer DIY team raisers?
So we just did. Team Raiser's new for us. We just went live with it this year, and we had to get Blackbaud to help us, so we had to pay a little bit of money to them to develop the right sheet and the right landing page for it. So they're going to have a Team Raiser page, and the way I understand it is each DIY event really just gets one Team Raiser page, but then it acts much like the Walk Team Raiser page does, so anybody can donate or make their own page or fundraise from there. We have not kicked that off. We're just getting that finished with Blackbaud. But I've seen it. I've seen it on other pages and other organizations, and it looks really great.
All right. Well, listen, I think that we have come just about to the end of our hour. Thank you, everybody, again. Thank you, Carolyn. And
yeah.
We hope to see you again soon on another one of these Turnkey Talks. And, Carolyn, thank you again for sharing so much of what you've done. It's just a great success story, and I know that everybody is very interested in replicating what you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. I've already gotten an email from somebody who wants to chat, and I'm more than happy to do that. I can talk about myself all day long, so give me a call if you want.
All right. Hey, thanks again.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.